Hi everyone, we're about to go live here on TripleH 100.1 Streetbeat, and we're going to talk about local council and Eyes and Ears, which is our little segment about what we've been reading, watching and listening to. Enjoy.
I want to fade this one out because we're running over time anyway. I've just hit the fade button. Or hit the next one.
Press fade.
Top left hand side.
That's next.
No, just below it?
Fade, got it.
Yeah, and that'll just run it out and the next one and not. Well, nobody knows.
That's my lesson for this Friday afternoon.
You need to come this way a little bit now. So you've got to look at your noggin up there, okay?
No, okay.
People want to see you.
Right, where are we?
Got about a minute.
So which part of council are you going to...
I will start with... I'll wait for you to ask the question about the tone of the meeting, but whether you want to bring that in.
Let's do it first then.
Okay, do you want to start the segment then? Or do you want me to start the segment?
You introduce it.
Okay. And then what we'll do is I'll go into... I won't summarise because we summarised it last week. I might talk about... go into the... I've got to get it right. Come on, Martin, concentrate. The Hornsby
LSPS, yeah.
Which was the study into the...
SPS, yeah, and the updates and the amendments that they wanted to put through and the whole debate around that.
Okay, I'm also interested in the motion urging council to write to the federal and state governments about imposing a carbon tax.
Okay, so we'll do... Now, I was going to wrap that into, because it essentially got knocked down on the basis of priority of money. We don't have a lot of money. They brought up the...
Right, but it costs nothing to write.
Yeah,
but the swimming pool, that was
the
another
swimming pool would be
contentious
one
one
as well, yeah.
Okay, terrific. We've got 5 seconds.
Okay. Welcome back to Streetbeat 100.1 FM on TripleH. What we'd like to do today is follow up what happened to, which is the favourite week of the month, and this time round for me, the year. It was the council meeting, and it was a really good council meeting. We had a couple of people standing out the front talking about climate emergency, but we all went in through the meeting after that. So those guests have been there for the last couple of council meetings, Justine. So
yeah, so I believe that's Extinction Rebellion, Hornsby,
right.
who are maintaining a protest. And I unfortunately wasn't able to make the meeting last week, but I believe that there was somebody from Doctors for the Environment there, and the local Grant Webster, who's an ecologist and activist, spoke about wanting council to recognise that we're in a climate emergency and to declare it, as Southern Highlands Council just did this week.
I take an objection to this too as well, because the council did recognise the climate emergency, right? They passed an amended motion that followed, that said, yes, we recognise that there is a problem and the council's going to do everything about it, and here's all the things that we're doing.
Did they declare a climate emergency in
They didn't use those exact words.
They didn't use those terms.
But
they put in targets, which would basically just to bring them in line with the state government targets, which aren't in line with the IPCC science. But they didn't say a climate emergency. There was
no, but I mean, when the meaning of the motion covers that, you don't have to use those exact words. And I think, this is actually, it's distracting without getting... Sorry, I'm enjoying
you two guys talking about it. Normally I'm not in the corner when this issue's on.
It's distracting. It's distracting. It's going back and trying to revisit the past, right, and trying to get, my exact motion through. I really do think it's counterproductive. We've got to take the way things are now. We've got to move forward. And I can't see it serving any purpose, because council is not going to go back and revisit that. I mean, that's just not going to happen.
We'll see. Watch this space.
Just to forget everyone's listening and watching, we'll just keep chatting. Actually, I'm saying that we are Facebook live streaming this segment as well, for those who are at home listening in. Just following up your point there, I've been trying to encourage people to go to council meetings in my circle of friends, and a few people were there, and one person, he was a young 20-year-old, and he was there, and he texted me. I said, I can't get in. There are all these protesters out the front, and he felt just a little bit intimidated about actually coming into the meeting. And I texted him back and I said, look, it's all right. All you have to do is walk through. You can say hello or whatever, and the doors will automatically open for him. So there is that side of it as well. Some people want to come along to these things. And it's, don't get me wrong, it's not intimidating. I walk through and people say hello and the rest of it. But if you'll just come into that sort of thing, and Steve said before, as he was driving home on Wednesday, he saw people all outside the council chambers as well. But that's what democracy is, isn't it?
Absolutely, and people have different views as to the protest movement. But if you look at history, historically, it has been the collective movement of people that have, you look at women getting the vote, you look at the civil rights movement. It all did involve civil disobedience, didn't it?
Well, it was part of it.
It was part of it. That's right.
There's a movement. There's a movement amongst the intellectuals when these things happen. There's a movement about the grassroots of things that are happening.
But it gets people talking too, doesn't it?
This is what we're doing, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. But
let's get into the building.
That's right. What was the tone of the meeting like? I'm curious to know for the first meeting of the year.
You know what? I was really quite interested because about an hour and a half into it, I felt like we were in election mode. There was a few people who spoke a bit more than they normally do speak, and there were a few people that I can be corrected, but I thought there seemed to be a few decisions and conversations and things like that where there was a change in a view to maybe an issue that might have been raised 12 months ago. I can't identify anything, but I just thought it was really, really interesting, that side of it. It's sort of something intangible, but I really felt that.
And did it feel like the councillors were working collaboratively still? Was there more conflict or tension amongst them?
Look, from my point of view, I don't see obvious conflict between the councillors. I don't know what happens in the background from that point of view. But clearly the meeting was one councillor down who was ill or had family illness, and that was really interesting because that played into the numbers. And then decisions were made that when there was a full council that they might have gone in other directions. So I thought that was really interesting. For example, in the LSPS, and for those at home, that's the Local Strategic Planning Statement, there was a update from the consultation about some amendments they were going to put in. There was an original motion put there, and then Joe Nikita, the Ward B councillor, put in an amendment. And that amendment was put and discussed at length. I must admit, it's a fault in the procedures, because the public got up and spoke about what they thought was going to be the amendment.
Yeah, this is the same as the climate emergency thing, and then there's an amendment.
They did, and in fairness to them, they flagged there was an amendment to the motion, but the public, I didn't look on the business papers that night before, but it might have appeared on the business papers, so I'm happy for someone to ring in and correct me there. But despite that, I sort of do my homework a week out, and the night before I might have missed that. But in any of...
Look, I agree with you. There's something flawed about that process in that, and as I said, this happened in the climate emergency motion as well, as that 30 people got up and spoke, and they ended up speaking about something that wasn't even put to the council. And so surely council can do that arguing amongst themselves beforehand, and the motion that goes is the amended motion, so that it's surely they can change. And that was
significant then, because that was 31 minutes because there's normally 3. It would have been an hour and a half before we got to the next point. And then what happened was there was a 10-point motion that was obviously well considered and planned beforehand, but we didn't know about it as people in the audience.
Was this last night or?
No, this was last. We did one before. But last night, what happened there was an amendment came up, and there was one point in it that I wasn't comfortable with, and I spoke to Joe about it, so I'm happy to say this here now, is that it was the removal from the LSPS, the statement, whatever it was, about R3 medium density housing. And I thought, whoa, where's this coming from? And then I thought to myself, I'm completely disenfranchised in this point now, because if this amendment gets passed, it's gone through and the public haven't had a chance to talk about it. So probably the first time in a long time, I felt quite strongly, just internally. I didn't say anything about that. So that's just me being passionate, I guess, or maybe irrational. I don't know. So I don't know. So in the end, what happened before that amendment was put, Councillor Emma Hyde from Ward C put what's called a foreshadowed amendment. Procedurally, I thank God I've been there for the last 3 years, because you can really get confused with meetings. And I was sitting around people, and in fact, to be perfectly honest, a couple of us were texting each other saying, "What's going on here?" we were getting lost about what was happening in the meeting. So then what happened is that they had some discussion about the Joe Nikita's motion, and then what happened, that got lost. And then what happened was that the amendment put up by Emma was passed. Therefore, the original motion that we had all made our commentary on was put in the background because the amendment becomes the motion. Now, from the point of view, there's a lot of detail around that, but the fundamental thing about that part of the motion is that it brought the actual concept and the language that you talked about before of climate change into the document and higher up rather than a bullet point down the bottom of the document. So that was the purpose. There were other things, and I'm happy to be corrected by any of the councillors from that point of view. So I just really enjoyed the procedural side of it. That, it was really fascinating to watch that. So in answer to your question, everyone was sort of business-like and procedural. This is how you do this. And once again, a masterclass in running the meeting by the mayor.
He is pretty good. There's a lot to learn from that man.
So it was pretty good. So there was that side of it. Go on, yeah. No, it's up to me again. All right, the other thing that was really quite interesting, and I'll talk to you about this thematically, there was a bit of a concern about, not spending money we don't have. So they said that. Now, I'm not quite sure if that was the excuse for not voting for something.
Is it in the context of the Brower pool?
Yeah, that's one of them.
Right,
Yeah,
but there were other items
There were
too
other
that it
items
spoke
as
to.
well. Probably it wasn't, may or may not have been mentioned, but it could have been mentioned, which we'll come to a bit later on, about the clock tower. The clock tower, is that what it's called? The clock?
No, the fountain.
The fountain.
Fountain.
I keep saying it's a clock tower that doesn't clock anymore.
It's a fountain with 3 clocks.
3 clocks, there you go. The fountain, but in particular with the, and I mentioned this last week, that motion by Mick Maher was put forward about really $145,000 of seed funding for investigation. And a couple of councillors said on this point, as I could consider this to be an important issue, I'm not prepared to spend the money on that. That was one of the reasons why the people weren't comfortable with that. And another reason is...
So that got voted down?
It did, yes. And another reason is that, as has been said by a number of councillors over the years, this issue's been around since the dawn of time. And I think, some people want to bet it down, but maybe it might still become an election issue in 6 months' time.
Because just because something's been considered in the past doesn't mean it can't be revisited. Populations grow, populations change, it's becoming hotter. So I think that perhaps because even if it was determined some years ago that something might not have been feasible, say for example, something like a pool, it doesn't necessarily mean that now in this particular, 2020, there's not a need for it, or that there's not a great reason for doing a further feasibility
study. Is there
study.
$145,000 need for it?
Well, it depends on who you ask, I guess, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Some the kids of Barara or people up in Barara that haven't got a public swimming pool might say it differently to people that are in other parts of the...
But the other motion that got up didn't rule out, it wasn't talking about things like, water play areas and things like that. I'm not doing a service to the whole thing, but, there's a whole lot more to it, but that's what the discussion was essentially about. It's, as you'd appreciate, it's very hard to do a synopsis of something that went for 3 or 4 hours and just try and to snapshot it. But even so, do you swim in Galston Pool?
I don't now, but I have done over the years. My husband's been a member of the Masters Swimming Club down there, so he was swimming every week down there. All my kids learned to swim there, notwithstanding we do have our own backyard pool. We use their Learn to Swim programs heavily. I used to swim once a week for a period there, just for exercise in a 25-metre pool. And so, my family has got a lot of use out of the public swimming pool, notwithstanding that we also have our own backyard pool. And in terms of, I guess sustainability, it's certainly, I think, more sustainable if we had a public pool that we all invested in rather than having multiple pools in everybody's backyard. So I am an advocate for public infrastructure like swimming pools, but I do recognise that Hornsby Council is facing financial constraints and needs to be mindful of that. I just think that perhaps a further review of the situation might be necessary to see how many people within that particular community would utilise a facility like that.
When I was your neighbour, when I was in Nancy Place, Galston, I probably did a few kilometres in the Galston pool, but you're right about the swimming. I went to Round Corner where that pool is, or was, not Round Corner, near McDonald's. There's a swimming pool.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether it's still there. I do know where you're talking about.
We did all our swimming lessons there, so, and there was a discussion about is there enough people, you talked about growth before, to handle the private enterprise pools and another public pool. So I don't think the issue is going to go away, particularly in 2020. So I think, like we do each year, we talk about Barara Pool a couple of times a year.
We do. Yeah. I'd like to see the total amount of money that's been spent on Barara Pool studies, though, over the years. It's been a lot.
Probably enough to put a pool in.
And the cost of maintenance, people much smarter than me can give you figures everywhere.
Well, the argument that Mick Maher has made over the years too, isn't it, is that the equestrian facility that was put in at Galston was done so because a small segment of the population wanted that facility and used it, whereas a much larger group of people would probably use a public swimming pool.
Yeah, and also there's a tyranny of distance thing here, as people think, well, Barara is just 4 suburbs north, but it's 4 suburbs, and once again, the biggest sub-metropolitan area in Australia. It's a long way north. So, there may be a justification there, I think, just from geography, that who wants to come all that way down to Hornsby to find a park?
I've converted you to a geographer. Moving on, because we've talked enough about Barara Pool, I think.
We have. I think that's a general rule.
Actually, can I just interrupt you there? Can we just take a short break to listen to our station promos, and then we'll be right back to talk about what else went on at the council meeting?
Well, I'll leave that on, remember? I'll leave the Facebook on, just remember.
Okay, so we are going to have to watch the time in this last segment. I couldn't believe it's 22. I thought
we didn't get
on a spot and up.
I was flashing at me.
I couldn't believe you guys were going off about climate change together.
It's not. It's what the discussion is in a very civilised way is what's the most effective use of your time in the current situation, and I honestly don't think it's. I don't think it's standing around outside of council.
Look, this friend was quite intimidated. He said, "I can't get in. How do I get in?" And this isn't a person who's concerned about things. But he just thought, I didn't expect this. I'm coming to the council meeting for the first time, and
expecting this a somber mood.
Yeah. So that was interesting. But like you said, and your point about processes, grassroots. Like when we go back to our history, the Russian Revolution and all that sort of stuff, there's things happening in the background of societal level, bigger things like globalisation stuff. We talked about with Steve about that plays into this stuff that happens. It's not just one thing. To what extent is the revolution the cause or the trigger for something that's been...
You're talking about direct action.
Yeah, things like that.
Yeah, I guess there is, but I do think it retains a focus on it, doesn't it? It calls it to attention, the fact that would we have achieved... Well, if you look at civil rights movement in America, like switch to war, like that's pretty major civil disruption, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it wouldn't have happened but for the fact, I think, actually, I'm confusing my things. That's right. Yeah, the civil rights movement where they did the freedom rides and all that.
Yeah, that's
So
right.
we've probably only got about 5 minutes to go on this afterwards in order to wrap up.
Let's check at the time we've moved to a song. Do we want there to be a song right now?
Not
we
really.
want to go back? Okay, I can
Where
fade
do
it.
we go to?
So we'll go.
What do you think's the most important?
The clock tower. What's it called?
The fountain.
The fountain. Welcome back to TripleH 100.1 FM, and you're on the Streetbeat program from 4 o'clock until 6 o'clock, and you are with Martin, Justine and Neil, and we're in the second segment of the council.
Yes, sorry about that. The
Well,
fade
nice
button
music
was
I
not
was listening
triggering.
to.
That's right. I don't know what happened to fade, but so my apologies for that.
We were talking before about priorities. I was trying to take a sort of a slightly different approach about picking themes, and so we were talking about before spending money that we have and we don't have, and the fountain. I'm actually of the opinion that sometimes money spent on cultural things and things of image, philosophy, maybe even optics, things like that, are worth spending money on. And anyway, they had a meeting. They had an agenda item there where they were talking about I'm going to say clock tower, the fountain. And essentially, it's basically has been working for a long time. You might know more than Neil about the old fountain.
Well, we've come in and out of it. It was nearly 30 years old now. The early 90s, I think it was originally erected. Designed and largely built by Victor Kuzak, who now has retired to the North Coast, is 82, and really does want to see his legacy. This is his major work of his life.
And that was sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
That was a major point at the council meeting, saying we have this person who actually understands the core of this, and if we're going to do anything to not let it sort of deteriorate, let's get in contact with Victor and work out what's happening. And the other thing that was there was, I'll keep going just for a minute. The other thing was there that there was a video clip that Councillor Tilbury put up, and then the producer of that video clip got into contact with him, and he was at the meeting as well, and he got up and spoke at the meeting. So it was really nice to see the people that are involved in this project, like someone like myself who doesn't know a lot about it, doesn't even know what to call it. Sorry,
that was a great clip. No, I watched that YouTube clip too. That was really quite interesting, wasn't it? And it is iconic, the fountain, isn't it? Like, whether you think it's attractive or ugly, and I know it does tend to polarise people, it is an iconic part of the Hornsby Mall.
And it's a puzzle, the puzzling thing. And we went into this a couple of years ago where we had Victor Kuzak in here, and we spoke to the Friends of the Fountain as to why, what is going on here. There's these differing stories about how much it would cost to fix up and get it working properly. Victor Kuzak, is basically saying it'll cost you 2 and 6 pence, and council's saying it's going to cost you, a couple of $100,000, and nobody can agree.
And I'm inclined to think you don't know what the added value or the unintended consequences of more people coming in. It was phrased that it's known nationally, if not internationally. And if we bring in another 100 people a day to go shopping in the local shops and the rest of it, that would make a difference. And even though
it's not always about money, Martin.
No, you're right, but it might help the council realise that there might be some money that builds into the economy there. So,
and there's a feel-good factor about it as well.
Agreed.
Everyone says the fountain. Everyone knows about the fountain. They meet at the fountain. Kids love walking around it. It's a very, cheerful sort of a thing. It just needs to work.
Can I bring up one more item? How much time do I have? Okay. At the end of the meeting, Paul Taylor, and he's on the Pennant Hills Trust with me, and he's a local physio, and he gave a very powerful 3-minute public forum speech. It's the very last one if you want to listen to it, and he articulated really well, much better than I could do. Basically the whole issue around, and he itemised the number of shops that are closing down in Pennant Hills, and he went through the list. And there are a lot of villages in the community, and there could be a number of reasons for that. One reason I would tend to agree with is the light rail and less people in the area, so that could contribute to the business side of things. And I'm not talking about money, Niels, necessarily. And the other side of it is the lack of certainty, and this is the bit that got the councillors and the officers' attention about what the plans are. And as a business person in there, they're struggling to get leases because there are clauses now called demolition clauses. So you got 3 or 4 years lease, but then there's a demolition clause that says you can go. And so there was just almost a plea, but very diplomatic. Paul's very diplomatic, and he basically said, give us direction. If it's going to be 10 years, tell us and we'll get organised. If it's going to be 4 years and you're going to have a bit of a plan, and this can be replicated across all areas of the Shire. And I guess we've just got our southern and south-western neighbours, Beecroft, and they went through not a dissimilar thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I grew up at Pennant Hills, and I remember when that Pennant Hills Marketplace was built, it was thriving. There were wonderful shops in there. There was a little clothing shop called Country Lane. I don't know whether listeners remember that, but somewhere where you would shop off, and it was a great meeting place. And it really is a shadow of its former self, I think. The Pennant Hills shopping centre, which is quite regrettable. And
I think another one only shut down the other day. I heard it saw online the Java Lava or the Lava Java. I'm getting mixed up, but the cafe that might be closing down as well. So there's it's pretty hard.
Missed opportunities, and it makes a really interesting point, though, doesn't it? If the business owners had certainty, and then they could plan
Yeah.
for their future.
And the good news was it did really get quite a positive response, and I guess the next time the council has their strategic planning meetings, which they tend to do at the beginning of the year, maybe Paul's commentary might put that on the agenda for discussion.
Can I ask a question about the car sharing and EV policy?
Yes, that was passed at the beginning of the meeting. They have if people in the public want to speak to it. So items 1 and 2 you're talking about came up at the very end of the meeting. And Emma Heidi, even though it was going to be passed by exception, she spoke up quite passionately, as she does, in relation to the importance of the first bit is the car sharing, and the other bit was the EV power slots, which we talked about last week on public land. And it was just a bit of discussion. There was no public forum discussion at all. Emma made a couple of statements, and then it just passed through. You went to general business after that.
No mention of electric bike stations anywhere?
No, I didn't hear that. That's a good point. You're going to take my bike riding from Gloucester, mate.
Oh, I've got an electric bike. Haven't you
Oh,
heard me
wow.
talk about my electric bike? It's absolutely fantastic.
I
ride
ripping
it
through the gorge.
Do you know, I haven't been brave enough to ride through the gorge as yet, but this weekend I think I'm going to tackle the gorge on my EV. But they are really brilliant ways of getting around the neighbourhood because,
No, that sounds good.
yeah, it's a really nice way to travel.
Yeah,
And-
so there wasn't much controversy or discussion about it, but sort of very much a decision statement by Emma.
Was there a bit of controversy though around, there was a motion put up by Councillor Mick Maher about writing to the state and federal governments to advocate for a carbon pricing mechanism. What was the discussion around that like?
Really, the discussion really was, if you hadn't read the paperwork, the discussion wasn't really about the motion being writing to those representatives. It was more that the discussion was down the path of, what's the cost of doing this and what are the implications if we do this then as a council. And then the other thing about it, I'm just reporting what I saw, heard, and the other thing they were saying was we are a local council and it's really important to be cognizant of broader state, national and international issues. But the bottom line is if there are consequences from a financial point of view of making such a decision, we'd rather defer it and have more discussion about it, so the motion was lost. So that's where we're at. You're both nodding but no commentary.
Well, yeah, I don't want to, because I'm dead keen to talk about what I've been reading and watching this week, so I'm not going to continue that conversation. But I mean, it's sort of a bit out of the purview of a council, isn't it?
Well, that's what they were arguing.
Yeah.
Well, those who were speaking against it, that's what they were arguing, yes.
Yeah. Because the council can't set a carbon price, so this is...
Yeah, it's merging into state and national affairs.
Yeah. All right, well, I've been very interested in your views, but we are running out of time.
So we are about to go into the Eyes and Ears segment, renamed, which is the segment about what we've been reading, listening and watching.
Okay, who wants to start?
Sounds like you do now.
I do. Look, I've been reading something that you would probably be very interested in, written by probably the world's most famous geographer, Jared Diamond, and it's called Upheaval, How Nations Cope with Crisis and Change. And he takes 7 national crises. It starts with Finland at the end of Finland during World War II, the Finlandisation, where they had to juggle between Nazi Germany and communist Russia, and then live next to the giant bear, as it were, and how they coped with that, and became one of the most independent but recognisable, national peoples. And how did they cope with that? Goes through Germany after World War II, and of course Australia during the 60s and 70s, leading up to the dismissal. How did Australia as a nation cope with that? And that's the chapter I'm reading at the moment. And he said, Australia, of all other nations in the world, asks the question, what does it mean to be Australian? It's a question that, brought the upheaval in the 1970s. And
Australia, not Australian.
Australia.
Oh, okay.
Australia.
Yeah.
What does it mean to be Australian?
I do a lot of navel gazing.
Do a lot of navel gazing, and we're still asking the question now, and it's because the mosaic nature of the country. It was originally established as Britain in a far-off land. And unlike America, it never had a war of independence to say, this is who we are, And he goes into the reasons for that. But in each of the chapters, he does point out how geography is an enormous influence on how nations react. Finland has got Sweden, Russia, the Baltic states by it. It's got Germany there. It's got all these neighbours. And when Russia invaded it in the beginning of World War II, none of them came to help. Right? And they had depended that if we get invaded either by the Germans or the Russians, someone will help us. Britain, France, US, nobody.
How too far away were they?
All their friends said no. Right, and so they had to build a national character based on the fact that in the future we have to stand on our own and we have to be as friends with our neighbours so they don't invade us. Not a problem that Australia has, for example, because of our geography.
No, it's tangential, but in geography there's two views of thought, and Griffith Taylor, the founder of Sydney University, in the very first publication of the Australian Geographer in about 1928, he developed a theory called environmental determinism, and basically all those things are out of your hand. Then there was another geographer who replaced him, name escapes me, but he developed this theory called possibilism. And that's what you're talking about. Unless you take control of the situation, anything is possible could happen to you. So they were realising they're not going to get support.
Yeah.
McDonald's Homes, sorry.
One of the he goes through a set of 12 characteristics of these national crises, and one of them is a good hard look at yourself, and 2 is ring fence the problem. Ring fence the problem, saying this is the problem. Right, that we need to deal with now, right? Yeah. We've got 1,000 problems, but this is the one that's an existential crisis, so we need to fix it. It's very interesting, and he picks that up from the way they treat trauma victims.
Wow.
Yeah.
Justine, he's done it again. He's moved from Pythagoras to very high level.
Have you read Guns, Germs and Steel?
No.
You've got to read it. I mean, once again, that's a book about how geography is an important effect on how nations rise and fall.
You won't get an argument with me.
Okay. Anyone else? I've taken enough time.
I will be very brief because with a blackout, I've got no Wi-Fi, so I'm not watching anything. And with my headlamp, it doesn't leave me too much time to read anything. So very scant reading and watching going on at my household this week. Hopefully we'll get our power restored. So next week I'll have something more interesting to contribute, but I'll hand straight over to you, Martin.
I'm reading an old book that I picked up. I haven't read many books 2 or 3 times, and this is called The Way of the Peaceful Warrior by Dan Millman, and it was in that era of the New Age in the 80s. And
it rings a bell.
Yeah. And it's a guy called Dan, and he was a gymnast who was trialing for the Olympic trials, and that's a real story, a real backstory, and he got injured, and then he had to go through the whole process of rebuilding himself. And I was so sort of naive and stupid. He met a guy called Socrates, and Socrates appeared on the roof of a garage, and he became his philosophical minder. How good I was in English, Justine, I realised it was actually his consciousness about 20 years later. But I must have been at my 5-year-old age of concrete thinking at 24. But anyway, it was a really good book, and I revisited it because what it did was it gave me a bit of a focus on what people can do to improve themselves and make a difference in the world. And the thing of it, by basically the first thing is getting your own act together and being responsible for what you can do or not do, and then work around getting people back to you. So we have a couple of minutes to go. I could talk about it for ages, but that's what I read.
Sounds really interesting.
Well, that's it, folks. Hold on for the sport with the bench. Lots and lots and lots of sport. And don't forget, that's lit with Shazzy D at 8 p.m. TV, books, theatre and great music. So this is Neil.
Martin here. Thanks for a great show.
And Justine. We look forward to having your company next week.
That's all right. That was good. Thanks, Justine.
Thank you.
Neil, well done.
Thank you, Martin.
That's
Thank
good.
you, Justine.
Thank you.
So if we
You and your
Only
long
one.
protesting.
long hair. I can see you as a long hair protester, weren't you?
Was.
You were?
Was.
What? I'll turn this off in a sec as I go by. What? I was going to say something. What was it? I can't remember now. Turn this off.
Well, it's keeping everyone talking.
Oh, that's what I was going to say. What are you going to podcast? Are you going to podcast any of these this week?
Yeah, I'll do all three.
Will you? Excellent. Okay. All right. Hope you enjoyed that, everyone. I'll see you around.